John Avlon, Nia Malika Henderson are back with us. Also joining us, CNN legal analyst Shan Wu, a former lawyer for Rick Gates. There's so much to parse through here, but what a lot of folks keep coming back to, and we were all just talking about this actually in the break, and Shan, I want to throw this one to you to start, is the judge here, Judge Ellis, and how much has been made of how heavily he seems to be going after the prosecution. We know that he wants things to move along, and that's, we're told, part of what's behind it. How much should we actually read into it at this point?
I don't think you can read too much into it. I think Ellis, I love that sketch where he's actually standing up as though he's making the objection himself. But he's really trying to protect the record. He is very strong-willed, doesn't hesitate to insert himself into the proceedings. But he's trying to make sure that, in particular, the prosecution doesn't veer too much into what he considers might be prejudicial testimony that he elicits, such as in the beginning when he warned them not to dwell too much on the luxury items so it might engender resentment with the jury. Similarly, he quite judiciously was concerned at too much sort of dirty laundry coming out about these other affairs, and that's probably why he called the sidebar. It was interesting to note the prosecution seemed a little surprised at that allegation, which perhaps one can glean whether they knew about that ahead of time or not.
So, Shane, you brought up the dirty laundry here. In what seems to be developing before our eyes is this interesting juxtaposition. You have dirty laundry, sensational witness Rick Gates, an embezzler, an admitted embezzler who had an affair and now was accused, at least in passing, of having multiple affairs there. The defense is using that to make its case, and the prosecution is using dry tax documents that may be hard to understand for the jury here. Do you think that there is a possibility they might identify with the more sensational aspects of this trial?
There's that possibility. I mean, it's always very difficult to predict the vagaries of a jury, and you really don't know till the verdict comes in. But this is the classic setup where the defense has to attack the cooperator's character and his credibility, and the prosecution tries to rely on a mountain of paper to show that no matter what you may think of this cooperator, just pay attention to what he's telling you about the paper. So that's the classic two sides being set up against each other.
Oh, the two sides being set up. You're gesticulating over here. I see you wanting to weigh in.
Well, only that, I mean, look, Rick Gates's affairs, while sleazy, are irrelevant, as Judge Ellis pointed out, to the case. And it seems to me the real headline is you got $65 million in foreign funds and multiple foreign accounts, some connected to the Russians with signing privileges from a guy who's connected with Kremlin intelligence. That's the most relevant headline out of this. We'll see what the jury and the judge decides, but that's where the attention should be, as nice it is to talk about affairs and ostrich jackets.
Nia, let's talk about Chris Collins, congressman from New York, the very first member of Congress to endorse Donald Trump. Arrested. It's a glaring headline. Whenever you see congressman arrested,
yes,
that's a pretty big headline, and that happened yesterday. There's someone very close to the president. It's arrested as part of this insider trading scheme where this pharmaceutical company that he was on the board of, he got a tip before the public did about a failed test, and then the government alleges that he passed that tip on to his son, who then told practically everyone he knows to sell that stock. This is a tough look for a member of Congress and a tough look for Republicans 2 months before midterm.
I think that's right, and you're going to see Democrats basically try to really paint this kind of picture of corruption, that the GOP is corrupt. They don't really care about the little guy. They're basically out for their friends. And you saw Nancy Pelosi basically talk about the culture of corruption. And you saw a similar thing play out in 2006, if you remember Mark Foley, a different situation in terms of what he was accused of doing, but the Democrats made the same argument there. What was so interesting yesterday was the meticulous way in which the SDNY laid this out in a way that's so easy for average people to understand. There is Chris Collins on the White House lawn because he's at this picnic that members of Congress have come to. He gets word about this drug trial failing. Then he calls his son. And then at some point he goes to other members of the family or extended family, goes to their house, stays there for a little while, and then they take action on the stock. So it's so easy to understand. We'll see what happens with Chris Collins in that district. It's a heavily Republican district. There hasn't been a real fight or focus on that from Democrats, but these are the kinds of things that can happen in an election year that a party can't necessarily control, that could add to momentum in this case for Democrats. So we'll see what he says. He says he's going to hang on. We'll see how long that lasts and what comes of this very interesting case that they have against him that seems to be pretty damning in terms of the evidence.
Well, and if they're laying it out, John, I mean, we're looking at the things that are in the indictment. They also lay out, in April, I believe it was April 25th of this year, they say you blatantly lied to the FBI. That's in there.
That's frowned upon.
It is frowned upon generally. Yeah. All of this, too, comes on the heels of not only was there the investigation from the Office of Congressional Ethics, there was then the House Ethics Committee. So we're looking at this trail here, and yet he's throwing up his hands yesterday and saying, you know what, I'm going to fight this. This is, nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Everybody look over here at my reelection bid.
This is, I learned it from you, Dad. Chris Collins could not have been blindsided by this. When Paul Ryan found out about it, he removed him from the committee he was serving on. And by the way, yes, it's shady that you can serve on a board of a company that that is overseen by the committee you're part of, and then referred it to the House Ethics Committee. So this has been coming down the pike for a while. Now, he's relying on the fact that thanks to the rigged system of redistricting, he's got an R+8 district, that Donald Trump won by nearly 60%. Improving on McCain and Romney's advantage. But he can't claim the victim card here. But he'll try, because that's what's proven tried and true among conservative base.
Yeah, speaking of people who've been involved in these types of cases before, the government almost always wins these cases if it brings them. These are very hard charges to fight if you're one of the defendants. But the political side of this also, Chris Collins allegedly got this phone call on the White House lawn. Yeah. He was at the White House at the time. There are other members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, who own this stock. They are not believed connected in any way to the alleged illegalities here, but I can't imagine they like having their names associated with it. I think there's that video, the white shirt back there, that was Chris Collins on the phone at the White House, getting this phone call. And again, as you head into the election, Nia, one of the things that you wonder is, Chris Collins may be able to be reelected even with charges against him if he stays on the ballot. But that point that John brought up in passing there, that here's a guy who was sitting on a committee regulating an industry where he owns stock, that is swampy. And that's something that Democrats might be able to run against.
That's right. This whole idea of economic fairness, right? Whether or not the system is rigged against the little guy, and basically rigged to help rich people and people who are in Congress and their friends, and you can sort of wrap in the tax cuts in that, and basically say, look at what the Republicans have done. They basically have given, kind of all of these corporate giveaways by the tax cut, and here's an example in Chris Collins using his position, using his access to enrich his friends. So yeah, I think you'll see that argument a bit played out. And you sort of tie not only the Chris Collins thing in there, you tie in what's going on with Paul Manafort, you tie in what's going on with Rick Gates on the stand there. So you have this whole portrait of the swamp that Donald Trump promised to drain, the swamp that Donald Trump talked about the Clintons being so entangled in, and this whole idea of the Clintons and Democrats basically having one set of rules for themselves and then one set of rules for everybody else. So I think you're going to see this as an underlying theme of Democrats going into November.
Hey, Shan, very quickly, we have to run. They're going to pull the plug on me here. But is this a pretty solid case against Collins as you see it?
Yeah, and I agree with Nia. I thought that the Southern District of New York laid it out very plainly. I think the phone records are going to be very, very damaging for him here. And, sometimes people think of this insider trading as something far removed from them, the problems of rich people, but it's really, at its heart, it's just theft. They're just stealing from people because they have that information. So I think it's a strong case against them.
All right, appreciate it.